All right, you guys, welcome to the show. It's Provoked. I'm Scott Horton from the Libertarian Institute and soon the Scott Horton Academy. And this is my buddy Daryl Cooper. He's the most important historian in America and, of course, hosts the Martyr Made podcast. How you doing, bud?
Doing all right, man. It's been a rough week, I think, for a lot of people. A shocking week. So I'm doing all right.
Yeah. All right. Well, so obviously the big topic is the murder of Charlie Kirk, his political assassination there. As of the time we're recording this on Thursday night, there's pictures of the suspect out there, but nobody knows his name and he's not been arrested yet. So that's the news as of the time we're putting this together here. Nobody knows exactly. I guess the Wall Street Journal said that shells of the bullets, still in the magazine, in the rifle, had trans and Antifa propaganda written on it. The New York Times is saying that their sources say that's not true. So I don't know. I guess we'll see how that shakes out. But I guess I'm interested, first of all, in just your reaction, Daryl, and then secondly, what your prefrontal cortex actually reasons about all of this. And so the floor is yours. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say.
It's a reminder in a way that beneath the veneer, the civil veneer, uh, of politics lies violence. And there's the institutions that we use to mediate our disputes, to find points of compromise, and to make decisions that may not be embraced by 100% of the population, but we decide as a people need to be done. You either use those institutions as a way of peacefully, hashing these questions out, or there's violence underneath it. And that's it. You either talk or you fight. Those are the two options. And Charlie was a guy who was trying to talk. Say what you want about, whatever. It doesn't matter, like, what you disagree on. Because the thing is, whatever you disagree with him on, no matter how hard you disagreed with him on it, he would have sat down and had a civil conversation with you about it and tried to convince you of his perspective. And if he couldn't, he couldn't. But that was how he approached things. And for a guy like him to meet and end like that is, it's unbelievably tragic. He deserved it a hell of a lot less than many of us do. And I talk about myself when I say something like that. Just in terms of just the irresponsibility of inciting rhetoric and things like, he's just not that guy. He was never that guy. He's a genuinely good dude. I only talked to him one time, but I know a lot of people who knew him very well, and he was a genuinely solid dude who, for all of the hate he gets from the other side, he was a guy who was genuinely focused on trying to de-radicalize American politics. Like, that was his real goal,
Yeah.
at least for like recently and in right now. It was not necessarily to put over this or that policy or convince people of this or that change that we need to make. It was really to bring down the temperature and show people that you can actually just talk about these things. And, our heart goes out to his family. You just can't imagine, something like that happening. Just the kids and his wife. It's terrible. And it's just awful. And there's really, about the act itself, there's not a whole lot else to say about it.
Yeah, it's horrible, man. And I didn't know the guy. I think maybe we tweeted back and forth a couple times. I know quite a few people who knew him. And, one or two people who considered him to be a good friend, and are really hurting now. So that completely sucks. And yeah, you're right that his whole shtick, more than any of the points he was making, was that we can all talk about this. That was his real point. So then, there are a lot of people now, obviously in reaction, who are saying, okay, well, you killed the guy who wanted to talk with you, and now you got to deal with us who won't even pay you that respect or this and that, and are kind of reacting in the way that one might presume the murderer would have wanted them to react, right? Which is to sharpen the contradictions and make everything harder when In fact, the left half of America ain't really going anywhere. So the cooler the right plays it, the more people from the left are going to move to the right and strengthen their dominance anyway. They blow their whole wad trying to crack down and lose all their legitimacy. They're only empowering their enemies. You know, that's Saul Alinsky, page 75. The action is in the reaction of the opposition. That's the whole point of doing an asymmetric attack like that.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
I
all you
didn't
have
learn
to
that from
do.
being a commie. I learned that from the Birchers, by the way. Thank you very much. But that's the footnote.
I mean, all you really have to do is look at the way the Democrats and just the regime in general treated the January 6th protesters, the way they went after Trump and the people around him, like using the legal system, just went totally ham and figured we're gonna use all the power at our disposal to shut these people down, and we'll clean up the mess afterwards if there's public relations fallout. And we see how that's worked out for him. It has not worked out well, you
Right.
know. And I think you make a really good point that those people who are responding that way, like that's the natural response. It's the predictable, natural response to something like this, especially when this is not the first time and when it is never treated the same by the mass media. It's never treated the same. It's just radicalizing for people when they see that clip that came up. I think it was it was yesterday when he had been shot, but the news hadn't come out that he was killed yet. And they somebody was trying to have a prayer for him on the floor of Congress,
I saw that. Yeah.
and the Democrats are hooting and hollering and booing and shouting and trying to break up the moment of silence. And it's like, that kind of thing is exactly what Charlie Kirk was trying to fight against. Not that they didn't want a prayer going, but just that kind of attitude toward your opposition, I mean, we should all be inspired a little bit. I certainly should, because I don't have this ability. At least I pretend I don't, so that I can disavow my own responsibility for it. But he would sit there and talk to people who would insult him, who were clearly like considered him a monster, an enemy, and he would sit there and maintain his composure and just talk with these people about whatever they wanted to talk about at these events, and I think you're right that these kind of things are. There's a lot of people on the right who are saying that the right's failure to respond in kind to this kind of thing, and not necessarily with political violence, but just again, why are we not sending the FBI or some new task force that we just created for this purpose around all the Democrat cities and rounding up all the Antifa people and everything? I mean, there's a lot of people on the right now who are pushing the line and really believe it, and have a case to make. I mean, like, I don't agree with them, but they have a case to make that a culture of just total impunity has reigned for way, way, way too long, where people feel like, I mean, you remember during the Trump administration when you had a bunch of when they had the COVID State of the Union address. I think it might have been the Republican convention. It was one of those events, and it wouldn't have been COVID State of the Union because that's January, but it was some event, and all of the Congress people and senators and stuff were coming out, and they were walking out of the place, and they were getting pushed around, screamed at, people in their face, throwing stuff at them. And when you see things like that, when you see the total non-response in the media, or even, I mean, if you've seen some of the clips on MSNBC of people not celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, but certainly saying that, you play with fire, don't be
And
surprised.
one guy got fired over it.
Yeah, that's good. It's there's this prevailing feeling that things are spinning out of control because we're not doing enough to keep them under control. And so that's what we need to do. We need to use whatever powers at our disposal to put things back in order. And I sympathize with that impulse for sure. I'm somebody who, as you said before the show, is not a libertarian, but I value liberty, and I'm somebody who thinks that and maybe this is what separates me from, at least on a policy level, from a lot of libertarians, that for liberty to exist, you have to have order first. And if people feel vulnerable and if they feel like they're in a chaotic environment, they're not going to want liberty. They're going to want stability and control. And, you know, the tools that we have at our disposal, unfortunately, are, are sledgehammers. And the problems a lot of times are, are surgical. And so, um, yeah, it's just an awful thing, man. Like, it really is. I mean, you watch that, and and you just realize that, I mean, it could be any one of us, because nobody deserved it less than Charlie Kirk. And
Yeah.
it's I think that we've probably entered a difficult and dark era, and we're going to have to work our way through it. It's not going to be there's not going to be a de-escalation phase anytime soon. I think over the next days and weeks, we're going to start to see
Yeah.
things that that are gonna shock and maybe worry a lot of us, even those of us who are entirely on the side of hoping that whoever did this gets strung up from the nearest lamppost. So
Yeah. Well, yeah, step one is real accountability for everyone involved in this thing, anyone and everyone involved in the thing, and all of that. But then, yeah, it can be that like, oh, after Columbine, now we just have school shootings now. Well, now after Charlie Kirk, everybody just kills each other's guys when they get on stage now. I mean, Lord knows there's plenty of countries around the world where they don't have free speech and all that. And free speech in just the First Amendment. It's people tolerating each other, doing things just like this. So we can just have it where, yeah, okay, the American tradition of political speech is canceled now. You can blog from the safety of your house. You can do your YouTube shows, but you can't go out and participate in any kind of public conversation. Or we could not go that way, and we could recognize it. Same for dealing with China or Iran or Russia or somebody that, like, this planet has got to be big enough for the both of us. The left half of the American political spectrum ain't really going anywhere, or only on the margin they are. And for that matter, the political left is like roughly 100 million people or something, right? And then so there's a pretty broad gray scale of who counts as a liberal or a progressive or a leftist or this or that kind of break off. And if you ever seen like a family tree of all the leftist groups of who's a Maoist and who's a labor this and whatever that, there's a million of them, man. There's so many factions and different sets of beliefs there. And it ain't right that, oh yeah, they all did this any more than every right winger did Oklahoma City or anything like that, which of course that was a bunch of FBI informants, but still, you know what I mean? So yeah, no. And what's funny is, so I've just always been a libertarian. So my dream is to always try to get the best of the left and the right all on the same page. That what we got to do is roll back the national security state first and foremost. That's the major threat to our liberty, is central banking and war and central banking, man. Eye on the ball, everybody. And all the best right wingers and all the best left wingers who understand me agree with me. That's the name of the game, dude. That's the corruption of the republic right there. And that's what needs to be challenged. But could I get everybody together? We did that Rage Against the War Machine protest at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, and it was a libertarian left kind of coalition. And I was pushing for like, yeah, we got to get some right wingers to come. But then it was so clear that, dude, if we brought any prominent right wingers, it would have blown up the whole thing. Libertarians can do a thing with left wingers, and libertarians can do a thing with right wingers, but not at the same show. We can't. You know what I mean? It's just we can't do it. And then. So now I'm willing to settle for, like, y'all just not kill each other or me or us or anyone. You know what I mean? But, like, never mind a real realignment where it's the people versus the war party, right? That's what it should be. It should be the Democratic Republicans versus the war party of taxes, tyranny, death, and Israel, right? The bad guys, the people with power versus everybody else. And anyway, I've always known that's what is supposed to happen, and I've always known it never will. But yeah, I've got to do my best to encourage. What would Charlie Kirk say? He would say, everybody chill out. Everybody prove each other wrong by arguing instead of shooting each other. That is what he would say, even in reaction to his own murder here. We can all be sure of that. So, like, what the hell? And because the future's always coming. What are you going to do? I hear people talking about, oh, well, the Rubicon is crossed now. Well, what are you saying? You're like getting your Kevlar and going to war? No, we're not doing that. That's the other thing I wanted to rant about. This whole thing about Civil War. Like, what are you going to do? You have Williamson County versus Travis County? No, you're not. The liberals from the cities aren't coming outside for the country folk. And the country folk aren't all like forming up militias to go and invade the cities and depose all their blue mayors and whatever, right? This is all nonsense. None of this is happening. Americans haven't fought over the Mississippi River since 1864, right? Or maybe 65. So,
Well,
just
Americans don't.
get
We
all
don't
of
know.
that. We don't need any dirty kidnapping and murder wars either, right? Like everybody chill, please.
Say like we Americans don't know what a civil war is because we didn't really have one. We kind of split into two countries and then had a regular war.
Yeah, that's a good way to put that. Yeah.
That's not civil war, man. Like from Northern Ireland to Sarajevo to Beirut, just pick up any book you want and believe me when I say you do not want any part of a civil war, because civil war means you don't know if you can trust your neighbor, and so you better join the group that's going to go into his house and kill him and his family before they do the same to you, because you don't know. And it doesn't get settled on battlefields. It gets settled in damp basements with pliers and blowtorches, with someone tied to a chair. Like that's civil war. Civil War is random people getting shot by snipers as they walk down the street. You don't people, and especially, I mean, yeah, like what are the organizing principles of a civil war in America? Like nobody's organized for anything like that. Like, and so it really does just it really would just, even that movie Civil War, which did a decent job like portraying the sort of fog and chaos of something like that. This whole idea of like I don't know if you saw it, but in the movie there's a Western alliance of led by California and Texas, and they're marching on Washington. That's just totally ridiculous in the
That's so
United
weird,
States. Like
isn't
the
it?
way it would look is like you have a big swath of the country where nothing's going on, but then this swath of the country over here that's more ideologically mixed are just randomly killing each other. There's no battles, there's no nothing, there's no marching on cities. It's just violence and nihilism and chaos, because that's what civil war always is. The same as how Americans we don't really understand revolutions because we think we had one when we really didn't. We really kind of a similar kind of thing. We like seceded and then had a war against the British. It wasn't like the French or the Russian or any other revolution where you're proscribing every enemy of the regime and any potential traitor that you can root out. That's what revolution usually is. And when people say that they want that kind of thing, like I always try to tell them it's unrealistic that to even expect that, but but B, that they don't want it nearly as much as they think they do,
Yeah.
because all it ever does is empower the people who are already organized and ready to take advantage of the situation, and that ain't us. I'll tell you that. Like it's not us.
Yeah.
You and your neighbors with your AR-15s are not. You're talking about there are massive interests out there, government institutions, organizations, military organizations, just all kinds of things, and you would be about whatever networks you're part of. Not you, Scott, but just anybody who's thinking this way. Whatever networks you think you're part of, add them all together, and they are 1,000th on the list of likely winners in any scenario like that. 99% of people in those kind of scenarios are just victims, and that's it. And we don't want that. We have to preserve what's left of our civility here. And I think now the question, though, and the people who are pushing for a harder response to this are gonna say this is, like I agree with what you said about the way war has normalized a lot of things domestically, and made a lot of things possible that repressive things that wouldn't be, and kind of soured our just non forget the government, just our interpersonal relations with each other and region. All that's true. But I also think, I mean, there's a lot of people that that would say um, that you just like you look at the social chaos that we have allowed to just take over this country really since like the late 1960s, where people are just looking around and they're like, they remember when they were kids and the country they lived in, and nothing was perfect. Nothing was ever perfect. Obviously, people think the 90s were perfect. You mentioned Oklahoma City; they weren't. Um, but when you have, just regular political violence happening as a matter of course. I mean, you go back, remember the 2016 election, every rally Trump held, there were mobs of people waiting to attack his supporters, like as they went to their cars. And the media just treated it like it was just a normal response to a fascist trying to run for office or something. You have these killings that this is, Charlie Kirk's the most high profile one, but it's not the first one. Um, and then you just have a lot of the, you know, I mean, people look around and they say, I used to walk down this street with used bookstores and boutique cafes when I wanted to take a girl on a date. And now, or take my daughter, like, out for ice cream. And now, if I want to do that, we have to avoid, getting too close to the alleyway so somebody doesn't jump out at us, and we have to step over somebody smoking crack where that bookstore used to be. And a cop is like 2 blocks down, just doing nothing about all of it because he's been ordered not to, or he's afraid of what'll happen if he tries. And people look at this and they're like, you know what, we need to do something to reverse this. And the only thing that people really know how to do, because the cultural questions, the cultural forces that are leading to all this degradation seem way too big for anybody to deal with, and maybe they are. Um, and so the solutions people look for are political, which means, they're violent. That's the violent solutions is all people feel like they have recourse to try to reverse what they see as really the destruction of their civilization. I mean, that's what they think they're witnessing. And I mean, I don't think they're crazy for thinking that.
Well,
And
and
so
that's
the question is,
the
like, when you
helplessness,
talk
right?
about
There's no
threats,
accountability.
hang on one second. Like when you talk about like threats to liberty, I mean, the war, all of those things, those are all threats to liberty. There's a lot of threats to liberty. One of the biggest ones, though, and you could end all the wars tomorrow and everything, but if people feel like their society is falling apart and they're becoming more vulnerable and their neighborhood is going to shit, and girls are getting stabbed in the neck randomly by dudes who have been arrested 70,000 times on a train in Charlotte, and their moderate centrist right political organizer that they like to follow is getting shot, and MSNBC is like making rationalizing comments. Dude, people, that's a threat to liberty, because people are going to say, you know what, like we can't go on living like this. And so we don't know necessarily how to fix it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to put in power somebody on our side and tell them we're going to look away for a while, and you just do whatever has to be done to put this to bed. I mean, that's where we're headed if things don't stabilize. If the spirit of Charlie Kirk when he was alive and the things that he was trying to push, if that doesn't prevail, then that's the direction we're headed, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, first of all, the thing is everybody knows their vote don't count. That's the main part of it. Like you're saying, is they got all these problems and they know there's nothing they can do about it, even though this country's supposed to belong to them. They can show up and vote harder and it just becomes its own joke, right? It doesn't do anything. And so that's the reason people are so frustrated, right? Then they protest and people crack down on that. So they get driven to violence from there, is because, as you're talking about, politics is the game of who gets to control the power of the violence of the state. So we're all supposed to wear ties and be nice gentlemen while we fight over who gets to sit in these chairs and make these decisions about who gets exploded to death or locked in a dungeon, So then, yeah, it's a life or death struggle. And the game can be dressed up as polite, but it can also get, very ugly. I would point out that all those social problems that you cite are the state's fault, right? All of those are because of the welfare state, because of the warfare state, because of inflationary money. I mean, people are, you hear, I see it, I quit Twitter because I can only abuse it, not just use it. So now I abuse YouTube instead. And I look at all the stupid YouTube short videos or whatever. And I see random people of all walks of life talking about how their lives are destroyed because of the cost of living is just through the roof. And it means that people can't afford school. They can't afford food. I mean, hell, I'm doing okay. I'm doing better than I've ever done right now with my book sales and whatever, as things are going and whatever. I can barely afford to feed a very small family here. And I know people are just hurting like hell out there. They're living in the Walmart parking lot. They're living in the alley that you're talking about because their rent doubled. That's why they're out there. And, I read this great thing about how, I might be repeating myself, it was about how a lot of homeless people, they start out, they got jobs, they're still living outside, but they're still trying to go to work, and they end up getting hooked on drugs after they're homeless. And it's so they can stay awake at night so they don't get mugged and killed. And then, but so now there's a meth head. And so now good luck getting back on your feet now that you got a drug problem in order to try to stay alive after the Federal Reserve System kicked you out of your house. And that's during the good times. That's the inflationary bubble before the crash, when everything gets 10 times worse and people got to survive the recession or the depression somehow and end up blowing their damn brains out. Again, the welfare warfare state, you talk about the cultural left and degradation from all that. George W. Bush was president and invoked all of cultural Christian conservatism in order to launch an aggressive war or 3 and torture 100 people to death, tell lies from morning to night for 8 years straight, and completely crash the entire planet's economy with his phony paper money system. And that's why even after 8 years of Obama, the cultural left was still in charge through 4 years of Trump, even though the pendulum had swung, because the right had completely blown their credibility by lying and murdering and torturing people to death and having no credibility left to stand on while people were moving to the left. And especially when they're destroying the economy, when it's Republicans destroying the economy through their rigged socialist games, crony capitalists and socialist, money printing and the rest. And then people move hard to the left and become more and more socialist in reaction, blaming, like pretending George Bush was Ron Paul and that it was free markets that caused the crash of '08. So now remember FDR emerged with Obama on the front of Time magazine? Like now we need a whole new deal. So, and of course, welfare paying single mothers to be single mothers, which has been going on for generations. I think I told you, Daryl, didn't I, about how I saw that documentary that was made by leftist black radicals in like 1970. And it was about how the Great Society had come and destroyed their entire civilization and forced all the men out of their women's homes, out of their family homes. This is the only way to get welfare. And the government agents went door to door to door, telling everybody to kick their husband out so they can get a bunch of free stuff. And it had completely destroyed their society. And they saw the results of it within 2 years. And they made a documentary about it, about how these well-meaning liberals came and they sure helped us good. And then they didn't change the policy. That was 50 years ago, 55 years ago, and they didn't change it. They've been paying women to kick their men out of the house ever since then. They've been printing money and waging wars and doing all this ever since then. And then, yes, people, and look, sorry, one more. When I was in 1996, 97, when I was in junior college, Toby, the manager of my sub shop, said to me, he goes, man, don't you understand the cops and the prosecutors and the state and all of them? They need crime. Of course, they let all the rapists and the murderers and the criminals out and keep the cells full of drug dealers. Oh, because that was probably what caused the conversation. Was I was complaining my friend Darren was doing years in the penitentiary for selling pounds of Mexican dirt weed and watching real criminals, armed robbers and rapists and killers come and go through the system while he was sitting in his cage. And Toby says to me, yeah. And he's not a libertarian theorist. He's just the manager of a sub shop. And he goes, Scott, listen, it's a very small number of people who commit the crimes in society. The cops know who they are. And they could just lock them up and the rest of us would be fine. But they need crime so that we need them. And so, of course, they let out all the worst criminals. When the Obama people came and in the aftermath of Mike Brown and all of that stuff, in the beginning of Black Lives Matter, there was a huge outcry, and including from libertarians, that yes, we need criminal justice reform. People are tyrannized to death by the state in this country, fined and feed to death. I just today, Daryl, finally got out of a 12, 13-year vendetta by the IRS against me. That I finally only am out from under now, where they just made up a bunch of numbers of taxes I could never have possibly owed, right? And I'm just one guy. I'm not even complaining. They do this to a million other people every year, year in and year out. They just completely persecute and destroy people. And then from all that pressure against all that tyranny, what do we get? They legalized murder and armed robbery and shoplifting up to $1,000 and camping on the streets, no matter like with drug use and no, feces everywhere and whatever, camping, in downtown in cities. They did it in Austin too. Um, and so they legalized the worst crimes. And meanwhile, they cracked down even harder on all those petty offenses. Oh, you got caught walking somewhere with a gun, off to the penitentiary with you, or there's a million other offenses where people get completely destroyed by the state, get on probation, try being on probation for 10 years and not get revoked and not have to go to the pen anyway. And all of this, people live just desperate lives under the tyranny of this regime. And then they legalize the worst crimes, and then understandably, like you're paraphrasing a lot of people and sympathizing with them, and I sympathize too. You want to see the state crack down, but they're not going to crack down on real crime because they need you to keep wanting them to crack down. So they're going to crack down on you instead. That's what they always do.
What's the answer then?
I don't know. Well,
because
first of all, take as much power away from Washington as possible and revert all power to states. Have hard money, completely abolish the central bank and abolish the empire, insist on hard money and an end to inflation.
But the response, the reply everyone's going to give to that is, okay, so we just accept this and deal with it until.
I mean, by all means, vote for Republican judges. No. By all means, vote for Republican judges. But I'm just saying, like, even then, if you want Republican judges to sentence violent criminals to extremely lengthy and punitive prison terms, you should also insist that they make sure they got the right guy. Because, of course, we have a huge epidemic of people who get the entire book thrown at them when they didn't do anything. We have an entire criminal justice system where you don't get a fair trial like on Matlock at all. They threaten you with 99 charges and you plead guilty to 16 of them so that you only get 10 years instead of 55. And everybody knows that that's how it works. 99.999% of people don't get a fair trial at all. They get completely gangsterized. And it's because there are 10,000 offenses. These aren't even crimes. They're just offenses against state edicts that people have to go through the court system for. So you get rid of all of that. You have a bare criminal code. And obviously you need a civil code for separate court systems, civil code for doing business and lawsuits and whatever. But as far as a criminal code, you have a bare criminal code, and then you make sure that it's enforced fairly. And yes, by all means, violent criminals should only get one chance, maybe two. But I don't know, however exactly you want to divvy that up. But when it comes to premeditated murder or whatever, I'm not for mercy, but I'm just saying how many times they got the wrong guy. It's a lot. They really do get the wrong guy a lot. You can't trust a prosecutor or a judge because they're criminals too. And so,
I know.
What are you going to do? Give them as little power as possible, really.
An example of that is this project I've been working. I mean, it's not a project, it's just me, but that I've been working on for years now. And that if I can pool all the influence that I can get my hands on in the administration sometime in the next couple of years, my dream is to get a white paper in front of somebody to review this guy's case for clemency or pardon. It's this kid. He's not a kid anymore. He's been in federal lockup for 14 years now, from Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been out there. I've talked to his parents, talked to his family, talked to all of his friends. I mean, dozens of people. This dude is doing life plus 70 years in federal. And I'm 99.9% sure he's innocent of all the charges that they brought against him. And I'm 100% sure, basically, that he's innocent of everything except selling a little bit of weed. And this guy, the life plus 70, we'll talk about this case one of these days, because it's something that I get worked up every time I talk about it, because it's an insane case. But he got life for selling the drugs, which if I told you the whole story, we'd take up the whole episode. But it's an insane story. You could tell, reading through the trial transcript, which I've done a dozen times, that his own lawyers, and I talked to his lawyers, actually, when I went to Knoxville, I talked to all these people, got his permission to talk to his lawyers. Even they were I want to say they were taking it easy, but they were almost like, oh, this is the easiest case we've ever done. Like, this is the easiest acquittal like we've ever come across in our lives. They were kind of treating it that way. And they gave this kid life plus 70 for a first time nonviolent offense with no violence, no threats, no nothing even remotely involved in the case. And they tracked him for a year and a half, tapped his phones, followed him, everything. Never caught him with drugs, never found him talking about drugs, never got him anything. Right, and this kid's got life plus 70 years, and
These are feds or state cops?
feds. And because you know how it is, like, it's just exactly what you said. Like, they take it personally if you make them go into court and actually go through all that. They're like, all right, you son of a bitch, you're gonna make us go to court, we'll show you. And that's why everybody, who's ever been in a federal case, their lawyer tells them no matter what, you got to cut a deal, because these
There's a
people
million
were.
of them. There's a
And
million, and they do
and
this
the,
all the
so
time.
anyway, the point I wanted to make though is this guy he was like a classic gun collector. He had like, like a old World War II Browning like machine. He had all the licenses, all the special things and everything. He had this old like World War II tripod mounted like Browning machine gun with like the ammo cases that were still sealed in wax that he was never going to open because there were collector's items, all that kind of stuff. Well, they said that, well, since you're a drug dealer, yes, all of these guns are legal. Everything was bought legally. Your name's on all of it. It's all fine. But because we got you on this drug thing, we're going to say that these guns were like there to, yeah, we never found you using them in the commission of a crime or whatever, but anybody who came to your house, they would have seen those things and they would have felt threatened by them and they would have thought this guy's dangerous, and so therefore we're going to give you firearms charges as well. And they tacked on 70 more years for that. First time offense. This kid had never been convicted for jaywalking. Okay. And Christian family, church going family, like from the west side suburbs of Knoxville, Tennessee. His dad has a Q clearance, works at Oak Ridge National Labs. Just his father and mother. He's a black guy. His father and mother, these older folks who were born in like the 40s in Tennessee, right? So they're living under Jim Crow for the first early part of their lives. His father volunteers to go to Vietnam. He didn't get drafted. He volunteered and he went to Vietnam and fought. A guy who, if he had any excuse not to want to go serve his country, that guy had an excuse not to want to do it, but he did. And they raised up a nice kid, a good guy. And he's doing life plus 70 unless somebody can get him out of there. Just sorry, you brought that subject up and it gets me, but like, I wanted to say, you were talking about welfare and them going door to door telling people to throw the baby daddy out of the house and all that. Dude, it's so much worse than that, actually. And I found all this out when I was doing all my research on New York in the 1960s for a couple of my podcast episodes. Is when John Lindsay was mayor of New York City and state introduced a whole bunch of new welfare reforms where, like, they literally came out and based on this study by these two professors at Columbia, they decided there's not enough people on welfare, that there's a lot of people out there who, because there's still this sort of social stigma to it. It's this old depression era sort of, it was, and so they said, we got to get rid of that. We got to get people to the point where they don't feel that kind of stigma when they're taking money from the state. And so there was big advertising campaigns, door-to-door door knocking campaigns to tell people like, hey, this is your money. You deserve this. Like, don't, to get as many people on it as possible. Well, here's the crazy part. The two commie professors from Columbia, I can't remember their names right now, but I mentioned them in the podcast. They had written articles like in the last couple years where they lay out in explicit detail that, okay, here's the plan. And I'm not exaggerating. They say we need to get as many people on welfare as possible, especially Black and Puerto Ricans, because they're in New York City, because what that's going to do is it's going to increase racial polarization. It's going to give us a population of people that are dependent on the state and therefore can be used for various ends. And this will help push us toward the revolution. They were open about it. These two professors who were literally brought into the New York City government to advise and like, run this program. Basically, they weren't like the managers of the agency, but they were the people who were there, sort of, providing they were consultants who were leading the thing. And so it's like a lot of this stuff was done for the explicit purpose of pulling the cord on this thing that we're doing.
It's so bad because it's
It's
built in
crazy.
anyway. It's in the incentive anyway. I had a friend of mine who I used to know a long time ago when I was a kid, like before I was interested in these kinds of things, and I hadn't known her for a very long time. So when I talked to her about this, she wasn't like telling me, "Oh, you're Mr. Libertarian guy, so let me tell you this libertarian story." It had nothing to do with that. She's just telling me a story from her life that she had no idea why I would be even interested in this topic as a topic. She's just telling me a story. Her husband, who's a good guy, father of her 4 kids, um, he was doing tree trimming work, but it was just a slow summer. They had very little work. So she thought, well, we'd get a little help with the groceries. She goes down there, and the ladies at the counter, they tell her, look, you have a husband in the house? She's like, yeah, the father of my 4 boys. And they're like, well, we can't do nothing for you. But if you can get rid of him and come back, then we'll be able to buy you all the groceries you need and all that. Well, she only needs help for a couple of months here. You know what I mean? They're telling her to essentially get divorced or at least separate from the guy, separate him from his sons. And the thing is the ladies behind the counter, they're just some idiot ladies from her town who work there at the government office. They didn't go to Communism Destroy America College or whatever. They don't know nothing about that. Just their job is, in order to sign up for this, you have to not have a husband in the house. So what you do is get rid of your husband and we'll give you the money. In fact, like all you got to do is just phrase it differently. We'll give you this money to get rid of your husband.
You know,
To
you
get
know,
rid of him is what they're
what's
doing.
great?
Whether they understand that or not is clearly what they're doing.
You remember last week we were talking about, yeah, I used the example of what my friend who had been on the LAPD told me about the interrogation room and how cops and suspects both kind of adopted a personality that they learned from TV on how to deal
Yeah.
with that. But then a generation of them passed and like they're still doing that, but none of them realize they're doing it now. They're not like, it's the same thing. Like those ladies, like all of this stuff started by a lot of people who were like crazy revolutionaries who saw very clearly like the destruction that this was going to wreak on our. None of the people doing it now, none of the institutions doing it now are aware of any of that. It's all just built into the structure of the system now and keeps rolling without anybody having to know what's going on. It's just, the
Mhm.
purpose of a system is what it does. And those systems were built and put in place and given power. And, we're sort of like in this weird place right now where we aren't people are starting to see all this, but they're not sure how to shut it all down without while staying within the realms of what's politically permissible. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and sort of like, and I think about, for example, like if you go back to the Kenosha riot where Kyle Rittenhouse killed those people. Um, you know, I did an episode on that, and you look into the whole thing, and you look at the things that are being said by politicians and by uh, news agencies, 24-hour cable news channels and so forth, just media people, influencers, but people, and including people in government. When that in the lead up to that, um, that you look at that and you'd be justified in saying that this was not a riot. This was an attack on an American city that involved a ton of people from outside the area. That was essentially encouraged and incited by members of our government, people in the media, and there was like this supply truck that went out there that called itself Riot Kitchen. That was would go around to these things during the Floyd riots, and they went to Kenosha, and they would serve food, drinks to the rioters, but also they got pulled over on the way, either on the way there or the way out. And there was a bunch of stuff in there that was confiscated because it was stuff that was riot gear and things like that. They got like a $5,000 grant from GoFundMe. I mean, and then meanwhile, Kyle Rittenhouse, he tries to raise a legal fund on GoFundMe, and they ban it. You say you can't do that here, and
Yeah.
it's like these are the kind of things where people on the right are looking at it and saying, look, people, this is the way people are looking at it, and this is an extreme way to look at it, but they're saying the people who shot Charlie Kirk, they control all of our institutions right now. And so the idea that like, well, we just need to vote harder, we just have to like have conversations, like this is crazy. This is what we've been trying to do and it's not working and things are only getting worse for us and for the country. And and this is not even getting into, they don't know who did this yet, obviously. But you had that that I think it was an internal memo or something that Stephen Crowd released, supposedly from an ATF, someone inside the ATF, who said what now the FBI itself is saying, that they had found the rifle wrapped up in a cloth in the woods, and that the bullets in the rifle had engravings of like Antifa or anti-fascist and trans ideology stuff like engraved on it. And so who knows if that's true, but that it would track with things that have happened recently. There have been several murders by trans people, politically motivated murders in recent months and years. And you know, I, I think that we especially over the last 5 years since COVID, but really since like 2015, 2016, especially, we've driven a hell of a lot of people crazy in this country. And we're going to be living with the consequences of it for a long time, man. Like when you look at, if this is 3 or 4 years ago now. They do it every year. I haven't checked back on the numbers, but a few years ago, the CDC did their annual mental health survey, and this is a huge survey, 600,000 people from, that they go through and make sure they hit every demographic, every region, all these different things to try to get a general sense. A big, well-funded survey they do. And I'll never forget this, because I mean, it's when you just stop and like take it out of the, just, it's hard to shock us with anything anymore. But if you just imagine that you're reading about this in a different civilization, you're reading a history book, right? And you're reading about this civilization. According to the CDC's mental health survey a few years back, they asked the question, in the past 30 days, have you seriously considered committing suicide in the last 30 days? And the word seriously was in there. Of people aged 16 to 24, of all races and both genders combined, 26% said that they had seriously considered killing themselves in the last 30 days. 1 out of 4 people aged 16 to 24. And you read that, and the first thing I thought was like, why is there not a special session of Congress being called over this? How are there not, for like, we should have just every media channel should be required to give up 2 hours every evening until like we get this dealt with and worked out. So this is a massive crisis. Like a quarter of our young people are seriously thinking about killing themselves in the last 30 days. Like this is, but it was just, I don't even think it made the paper. You know what I mean? Like, and that kind of stuff has been going on and spreading under the surface, man. There's a lot of these, like, look, man, I'll tell you this. I don't have any sympathy for the trans movement. I think it's grotesque. I think that they are, they're enabling and encouraging people to go deeper into their mental illness in ways that are incredibly destructive to those people. That's the movement. The people themselves, there's a lot of these people that are victims of all this. There are a lot of people out there walking around whose health is destroyed, whose bodies are mutilated, who are mentally just completely deranged at this point because they believed what all of the elite institutions in our society were telling them. And they have to live with that now for the rest of their lives, as they're starting to realize that, well, they're starting to realize that either they got sold a bill of goods and now they're stuck this way, or they're just feeling the consequences of their decisions now, and they're just looking for somebody else to blame because they don't want to blame it on that. But there's a lot of these people who and I mean, we're seeing this. I mean, there's been a lot of these incidents where we're going to be living with this for a while, man.
And the thing is, the psychiatrist could have said all along that, look, if you want to live as a woman, that's fine. But what they did, they go, no, you really are one. and you got to fight everybody who disagrees. Just now you have to just make this complete break with reality, as you're saying, plunge the depths of your psychosis now. No, you really are a girl. You just got stuck in the wrong body. The doctor assigned you the wrong gender at birth, or what, like all of this just insanity. And then, yeah, it could be pretty hard to climb down from that. You could see, the trans shooter at that school from a couple of years ago. That seemed to really be the problem, right? Like big promises made, but none of this really makes sense. And then, he or she or whatever was lashing out at all the people
Well, and then,
who had told her
to
no before.
yeah, and like, you were talking earlier just about people who are looking at their life, who are just sort of realizing now as they're 35 or something that they're never going to own a house. They're never going to, people judge like their relative standard of living. Everybody talks about keeping up with the Joneses and all that. I don't think that's really like the standard, the reference point for most people. I think for most people, it's how they grew up. If they look at it and they're like, I'm never going to live in a house as nice as the one I grew up in. I'm never going to have the kind of financial stability that my parents had when I was a kid. Then they feel poor, even if they're not poor, even if they're still middle class, and still can live and survive and, and all that. They're going to feel poor, and they're going to feel trapped. They're going to feel that shame, that sense of failure, of letting people, their parents down, letting all these kind of things that build up into really toxic emotional, mixes. And when people feel that way, and this is the thing about, I really think like the poison pill in democracy is that not everybody is emotionally and psychologically cut out to be involved with politics. And democracy demands that everybody be involved with politics all the time, and you see it now, dude. Like after this assassination happened, you go online and it's not just like crazy anonymous people with like 18 followers or whatever. You have major accounts, people who have huge platforms using their own face, who are just out there like saying with no evidence that Charlie Kirk was assassinated by Israeli intelligence. And when you ask them, as Dave Smith did when somebody posted this, all Dave said, he said, well, what's the evidence for that? And dude, if you want your freaking blood to curdle and you really want to get blackpilled about the state of our society, go read the replies to Dave. Just for asking, well, what is the actual evidence? I mean, they're like, most people, first of all, like you have, I think we may have talked about this before, but politics, there is always violence at the bottom of it. And people on some level sense that. And so they know like the seriousness of the activity that they're engaged in when they're being political, that they're doing something that's a proxy for violent conflict, basically. And it makes it sharper than it would any another kind of activity. And so you have that pressure put on it. But then you bring in the fact that what that does is it means there are always enemies out there. There's always opposition. There's always somebody who's trying to do something to control you in a way that you don't want to be controlled, or to change your life or your environment in a way you don't want it changed. And it encourages very sharp us versus them thinking. It encourages you to look at your fellow citizens as potential enemies, and look, if democracy dies in this country, it's not going to be because some military dictator just overrides the will of the people and takes over and says, if you don't like it, that's too bad. It's going to be by acclamation, just like it was with Caesar, with the Romans, where the Romans were ecstatic when Augustus finally stabilized the situation they've been living through and what it really comes down to is people are just like, you know what? I'm just tired of arguing with people about all this shit. Like, can somebody else just deal with all this so that I don't have to argue with my neighbor and him think I'm a terrible person? Because these decisions are taken completely out of both of our hands.
Right.
That's why it's going to fail when it fails, because people just get sick of it.
All right, wait. So we got to change the subject, but first we got to do some business so that we can continue to change the subject. First and foremost, I Am a Coffee. There's this great company. It's really great. And I don't just say that because I got to deal with them. It's really, really good coffee. The best coffee I've ever had. It's Moon Doe's. Get it? They hate Starbucks. So it's Moon Doe's Artisan Coffees. If you just go scotthorton.org/coffee, it'll forward you on to mine, which is half Ethiopian, half Sumatran. And it's really dang good. And everybody in my email box says that they like it a lot and keep buying it. So check that out. Scott Horton Show Supreme Breakfast Blend there at Mundo's Artisan Coffee, scotthorton.org/coffees. And then, I guess Chris said he wants me to break them up, but I already put it off so long. Maybe I'll just do the other ad. Mikkel Thorup, he's a really good dude, man. I went and I toured Mayan ruins with the guy down there in Mexico, and he's a really good dude. Him and his wife, she's a lady, he's a dude. And what he is he's a real expert on how to be an expat. And if you want to get the hell out of here and or even just be able to have dual passports, potentially, or own property in other countries for a potential place to bug out or potential place to just diversify whatever wealth you've got and invest it in a wide variety of spots that you might want to visit. And the guy's a real expert. It's none of this, it's not like some ridiculous infomercial thing or whatever. And in fact, the whole thing is free. They obviously have some upsells for you, but it's from October the 10th through the 12th. It's at expatmoneysummit.com, and he will teach you step by step exactly how to do this, the different rules for the different countries, and how to protect your wealth from the tax man, and not by gimmicks and tricks and get yourself thrown in jail, but very carefully and legally protecting yourself from taxes. And so if you're the kind of person interested in that kind of stuff, this is where to start, is with the Expat Money Summit, and that is at expatmoneysummit.com this October 10th through 12th there. And so, and now I want to change the subject back to actually what you're saying, which is something that I think is very reasonable, or potentially very reasonable, in response to this, that government could do, that, like all other things being equal, my anti-governmentness would not necessarily object to, which would be, well, first and foremost, how about we have Tulsi Gabbard and everybody, we have Kash Patel release the Antifa files, and let's see everything that the Justice Department and FBI have internally on Antifa. And for that matter, the state police agencies. Let's do a global FOIA on every document about this, because I'm very suspicious of this thing. And I used to know like some black bloc, Earth First anarchists back like in the days of Seattle 99, which I didn't go to, but I knew some people who did. And they're sincere, like anarcho-syndicalist, whatever things. They weren't controlled or bribed by anyone powerful, whoever they were. A few people, on Free Radio Austin way back then. But so I'm like familiar with the type. But then see, there's this article, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Mr. Daryl Cooper, which the audience may be familiar with. If you're not familiar with it, even if you are familiar with it, it's worth rereading. It's just such an insightful article. It's at Time Magazine, and it's called The Secret History of the Shadow Campaign That Saved the 2020 Election. And it's about how they rigged the election for Biden, but it's all in the guise of how they saved it from Trump, right? Because that's their point of view, so they just tell the story. And there's a lot of aspects to the thing, and I only remember a very small percentage of them. I owe the article a rereading myself, in fact. But one of the things that's very powerful in there that I really took from it and never forgot was how easy it was for the very most powerful Democratic Party apparatchiks to turn Antifa on and off like a light switch. We want them to show up here. We want them to show up there. We want the police to stand down here and let them right there. I guess, I don't think they talked about who was delivering the pallets of bricks, but still, one of the things that they pointed out was that where were all the commies on January 6th? It was all right-wingers, no leftists. The only leftist there was Max Blumenthal out in the yard going, hey, I ain't falling for this. Journalist reporting, right, not participating. But all of the leftists, the agitators, all stayed home. Why? Because they all got a text message that said, don't go. And they all obeyed it because there's somebody in command of this thing. And then what do they all say over and over? They go, well, there's really no such thing as Antifa. It's not really an organization. It's really just like a set of ideological guiding principles about how the thing and whatever. But Daryl, that's just straight out of the NED and the USAID and the NDI and IRI and George Soros and his organizations and how they do the color-coded revolutions, man. It's how they've done it since Albania. Well, I don't know about Albania in 97. I know they did intervene heavily in Albania in 97, but definitely in Slovakia in 1998, in Croatia in 99, in Serbia 2000, as we all know, Georgia in 03, Ukraine in 04. They tried in Belarus, succeeded in Kyrgyzstan, failed in Lebanon, all in 05. And this is, usually what they do is dispute an election. And, if they lose it, they say that our exit polls say that we should have won and you're the one who cheated and refused to accept and this kind of thing. But it just seems very clear to me, and I don't know who, and I'm probably ignorant. Maybe someone has done real good work on this and I just am too stupid to know who they were. But I sincerely believe that and I have no reason to claim this. I'm not trying to argue the case for it. It seems to me like it ain't a coincidence that it was the Democratic governors that locked their states down the hardest for COVID and exploited that thing. I'm not saying they released the virus on purpose or whatever. I don't think they probably would go that far. But certainly once the thing was out and they had the excuse to lock the country down, I think they did that as a destabilization campaign against Trump, just as well as it was, centrally decided that they're going to make George Floyd. Cops kill people every day, pretty much, every week. But they decided they're going to make this one a huge cause, and they're going to have these huge protests and riots and all this. And you can see there really is a centralized control. Now think of never mind everything that the Doge released about USAID. Just think about what we already know from my book that came out last year. But then we have everything that Doge released about USAID and their ties to all of these NGOs. I don't know if anyone, even Mike Benz or Jesus or from a cloud or anyone, could actually perceive the forest of NGOs and the level of control that exists, through the Democratic Party and all of their allies in this country, all the cronyism and all of the payola and everything built into that thing. And so... You know what? If Donald Trump wants to do a RICO case on that and show me the George Soros in that, I am just so... I meant to wrap up on the COVID thing. Any governor that does that, of course, was risking their own governorship. But that would be worth taking the hit if we can bring down the president, right? And which was the point, right? Was to really destabilize the country. Remember, Trump tried to run ads where it was showing the burning riots, and he said, "This is Biden's America." And it was like, actually, you're the one sitting there right now. But it was his own regime was either aiding and abetting it, or at least were turning the other way and allowing all of this to happen. Really I think almost certainly to get him. And so, no, I don't want to see whatever, a new national police force to round up all the hippies and persecute them. But if there are specific people who need indicting, especially the powerful ones who have been behind organizing these networks, if Antifa is really nothing different than Otpor or one of these other groups, or, they have, as I show in the book, there's a million of them. There's one for every one of these tulip revolutions. They have these youth groups where they go out there, they get all of this money and go out there and cause whatever level of crisis is needed to destabilize the country and force a regime change. And so, yeah. And then here's another thing that would be perfectly acceptable for any anti-government person or any right-winger too, like a pro-government right-winger is, let's defund from all public funds, from all states, all liberal arts departments in every college. I'm for abolishing all government school of any kind. But whatever, if you people want to leave math and science and engineering or whatever, fine. But why in the world should we be forced to pay for people to be taught to hate the country and try to destroy it and to never get a job? We should not be doing that.
The
people can read the classics
there's a
online
libertarian
for free.
solution to that. There's a libertarian solution to that problem right there. And you don't have to go around banning programs or anything. All the federal government has to do is say, we're not going to guarantee loans anymore.
Right.
And so, or make the schools themselves, put them on the hook for part of that money. If you do that, then all of a sudden they're going to say, you want $200,000 to go to school? Great. What are you studying? Oh, you're an engineer. This is your high school GPA. We think you can probably get through school. Great. Here you go. Here's 200 grand. You want to study what? Gender? No, you're never going to pay us back. You're crazy. You're not getting it. 99% of those would go away overnight. You'd have a few boutique programs here and there for rich kids who want to go, do whatever. We always had that kind of stuff. That would solve the problem, literally overnight. I remember of all the things, same thing, that Molly Ball article from Time Magazine, it's exact, if I remember one thing from it, it's that exact part, because it hit me the hardest, is it was a combination of 2 points that were related. Is one, as they said, throughout the summer, throughout that entire period, there were weekly calls being held that had all of these media people, people who were in local and state government, people who were organizers of Black Lives Matter and the protests during the George Floyd riots, all these, and Democrats, leaders, of course, all of these people on weekly calls to plan and talk about, like, okay, like, how can we use COVID this week to get a certain message across, or how can we take control of the narrative this week and turn it to our advantage. And one of the things that they said was what you said. They said they had it all prepared that if Trump won the election, they had in 400 American cities and towns. I guess it must be towns too, because you get to the 400th biggest city and you're talking about a town. They had protesters ready to go, organized by the same people who organized the protests over the summer. So that means they had riots ready to go in 400 American cities. And the fact that they were able to just call them off, because I mean, it really does go to show you the level of control that somebody somewhere has over these things. Because the thing is, if these were just hardcore true believer types, I mean, look, Trump didn't win the election that night, but he didn't concede. He went out there and said, this is a bunch of crap, and we're going to fight this, and we're not going to let this happen. And so if those people were just true believers and not members of like a sponsored fight club, they would have gone out the next day to protest this fascist guy who's saying he's not going to accept the results but they didn't, and it's because somebody out there can pull that string or not pull it. And that's the kind of thing that, I mean, you go back, I mean, everybody loves like reading Tom Wolfe talk about this and everything, but you go through like back in the 60s and 70s, you have these crazy situations, whether you're talking about like Lincoln Detox in the South Bronx, where, you have this essentially like section of Lincoln Hospital in the South Bronx. It's just taken over by a bunch of Black and Puerto Rican radicals who are using it as like a drug lab and a radicalization center for drug addicts. I mean, and all funded by government money, all funded by grants from the city. Even as like, when they try to reduce the grant one time, a bunch of the employees went down to City Hall and trashed a bunch of offices and stuff. I mean, and these are like government funded programs and people. I mean, there were times where you would have organizations that were funded with city money that are rioting at City Hall. And, when you like, that's why people look at it and they look at stuff like in that Time Magazine article, realizing that riots in 400 American cities, which means, I mean, if you look over the course of the summer, we see what that means. That means dozens of people killed potentially, it means people losing their livelihoods, their homes, their businesses, all that was on tap. And that people, I think, like, here's the crazy thing. The phone calls, according to that article, where these things were being decided and organized, had local and state government officials on those calls. You had Democratic Party apparatchiks on those calls with the protest organizers, And so these are things that were being organized at the highest levels. I mean, and when people, this is the kind of thing that when people hear it, they say, well, okay, yeah. And you want us to deal with this with what kind of like mittens on? No, we need to deal with this with a mailed fist. That is the only way that this kind of thing has ever been fixed and solved. And, we need to find out who's responsible for this. And there's not going to be any legal loopholes. There's not going to be, some way they can slide out of it. If you're doing this kind of thing and it's leading to this, then we're going to deal with you. I mean, there's a reason that the Uncle Pinochet memes are so popular on the right these days, like communist free helicopter ride stuff. And it's because people don't see a peaceful way to deal with people and to deal with forces that that don't seem to care about the rules. Like, it's just the idea that, like, if you play by the rules, you're not going to be able to beat people who don't. And that's where people are at right now. And I honestly don't know. I don't know what to tell those people. I tell them I don't want them to go down that road. But when they challenge me, honestly, I just sort of sputter at them. Like I don't have a whole lot of good arguments to make to them these days, you know?
Yeah. Um, so something that's really important that's worth mentioning here, and this, better be obsolete by the time this video comes out, but by the time we're recording this on Thursday night, the cops let the guy get away. And they let some idiot divert them, which was really weird. I don't know if you saw the original footage of the old bald guy saying, "I have the right to remain silent." Right? He wasn't saying, "Hey, you got the wrong guy." He went that way, right? He was like, which maybe it was already understood before that clip that the cops knew good and well, and he knew that they knew that they knew that he knew that everybody knew that, of course, he didn't have a gun and didn't do it. They were just arresting him for something else, obstructing them or, yelling in their face or doing something. You know what I mean? I don't know exactly what happened right after that, but just right before that. But it looked really weird. And then when they were marching him away, he was saying, "Just kill me," which is like, he's acting in a way like he's in on this somehow or something, or at least he's trying to keep them from doing their job while the actual shooter is getting away. I don't know if that means that he knew anything about it or was just being opportunist to participate in the show somehow or whatever. But at the time we're recording this, they released a picture of a guy with a hat and glasses on and said, "Yeah, let us know." They don't even know his name yet. And they said the last thing I saw was they have a driveway camera of a guy walking by, but it's from across the street. You can't see anything. It's just a guy walking down the street. So I think that's amazing that for all of the surveillance and all of their powers and of course it was the federal police there, swung right into action. It wasn't just the local sheriff's department or whatever in charge, or the local university police. They had every jurisdiction, involved immediately, and they couldn't catch this guy. He could be anywhere by now. Which, I'm sure we'll find out that he didn't go too far, but who knows? But it just goes to show like just how completely uncommon. And then there's footage of the guy. People saw him up on the roof and I guess didn't say to a cop, like, "Hey, I think there might be a sniper up there." Like they just showed him to each other and then didn't do anything.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And for
You
all
got
the
a
people
comment
out
about
there
this?
who are saying that this had to be some kind of a professional hit because of hitting somebody that accurately at 200 yards, somebody who has fired a lot of rifles, I could teach you to hit a dinner plate at 200 yards in 3 hours. So that's don't go down that road. That's nonsense.
Yeah, it's people who don't know about guns who say stuff like that. And just, it's so much easier to just find a gun guy and ask him. Because if you do, they'll all say exactly the same thing. Yeah, 30-06. I mean, that's what they're for, is reaching out and touching things with. You know what I mean? I don't know. What do you think it's going to do?
Especially if you're undisturbed, lying in a prone position with your gun rested on something, that's not a hard shot.
Yeah.
And so this is not JFK, moving target in a vehicle from a window while you're standing up or something. It's not a hard shot. Who knows what actually happened? Obviously, like you said, we haven't caught the guy yet. I mean, they better catch him soon, man, because like that's the worst possible thing that could happen is if people on any side start getting in their heads that, you know, so you're saying there's a chance, like we could get away with this. Like that's the worst case scenario. At the very least, the message needs to be sent that if you are going to do something like this, you better be suicidal because there's no chance you're getting away. And probably the best case scenario for you is that you catch a bullet before they arrest you because if that doesn't happen, you are going to see an escalation and a multiplication of this kind of thing.
Yeah. And look, I mean, it's natural and healthy to fantasize about hurting Democrats. I can sympathize, but it doesn't mean we got to go that direction. We got to think better about that. And look, for everyone, I don't know. When I learned this as a kid, I learned it just as a given, right? Like clouds are made out of water vapor and free speech is important, right? These are things that people all know and understand, that whether you believe in natural rights theory or whatever, we're all each individually born screaming, right? We can talk. And if it makes sense to you, as it does to me, that if you own yourself, then you must own the property that you just acquired. Then obviously you have the right to say anything you want on your own property, to print anything you want and distribute it to any willing recipient. And our tradition has been, at least, that the same goes for publicly owned spaces, right? Town squares and public streets and whatever, where obviously you don't have the right to trespass on other people's property, but otherwise, like, yeah, unless this is the Orient, then yeah, we have freedom of speech. Of course we do, dude. So there's that, the natural right of people to just say what they want. And if you want your right to be respected, then you got to tolerate others. But then there's the utility of the whole thing, which all the founders agreed that, of course, if the whole idea of this country is that the people are sovereign, they're born free, and they allow this regime to exist to protect their rights, not this is the regime ordained by God to rule this land, and you people are lucky enough to suffer under it as its subjects, as is the tradition in the old world. If it's the same reason we have the right to bear arms, respect it, not that we have it, that same reason they respect the right to bear arms in the Constitution. The whole premise is that, of course, we come first. We allow you to be our security force. How could you take our guns away? That doesn't make any sense, right? Same thing here. They don't have the right to limit our freedom of speech. And then, of course, it's also important for the purposes of, for utilitarian purposes, right? That we have the ability to object to things that we think are wrong, especially without having to go to prison for it. And, in the tradition of the entire West and everywhere in the world is that treason means when you disagree with the government. In the Soviet Union, if you disagree with the government, they put you in the mental hospital. And think about what goes on in there. You know what I mean? That's not healthcare. That's the tradition of everywhere but here, even in Canada and Mexico, right? It's here is where we absolutely have to protect freedom of speech. And that goes for the same thing. I was just thinking when you were talking about, and I guess I mentioned the word too, when I was talking about from the financial crash where suicide comes up. Well, you're not allowed to ever say that word on YouTube, or they'll just censor you like right out of oblivion. Like, I don't want to say just unnecessary curse words and get us deranked for that. But man, we got to be able to discuss these subjects. And I don't care if they derank us for discussing that when it comes up. What are we going to do? Not talk about that when it comes up? It's ridiculous, dude. And they better start respecting our free speech. That's what's the problem there. Not we need to give in to them. They need to give in to the fact that people got the right to say what they want. And everybody needs to respect that. After all, this was the thing. The guy has freedom on his shirt, right? And then the banner on the thing says, "Prove me wrong." Right when they killed him, when he
and I think
shot.
and I think Charlie would have one of the things he would have pointed out is that the government putting people in jail for saying the wrong thing is obviously one of the ways that freedom of speech falls apart. But freedom of speech is a culture as much as it's a policy, or probably way more than it's a policy. You go back to Weimar Germany in the 1920s and read the Constitution. They had basically what we would call freedom of speech. It wasn't written like the First Amendment, but it was written into the law that people could say what they wanted. But no, you couldn't. Because if you were a right winger, you were going to have communists show up to your meetings with, stink bombs if you were lucky, bullets and grenades if you weren't. If you were a left winger, you were going to have National Socialists or somebody else show up and break up your party. And so they didn't have freedom of speech because the culture just wasn't there. And this was the part of it that Charlie Kirk really represented. He understood, and he looked around, and look, he could have. It is very, very lucrative to just be a firebrand, out there just breathing smoke out of your nostrils and calling for the destruction of your enemy. There's a ton of people out there who build huge platforms doing that, and especially like it is not always, it can be a really thankless position to take sometimes to do what Charlie did, where he would take it from the right as hard as he took it from the left sometimes, because he wouldn't go far enough because he's treating these people with too much respect and all that. But if you care about what happened to him and if you feel bad about that, then respond to it the way that, in the spirit that he would want you to respond to it, and don't really just like trash his life's mission basically in your response to this thing that happened to him, because I mean, I would just say, he's the one who sacrificed himself for it. And, so he should be the one who really has the most say in how we respond to it. And we've got enough public statements and just enough of him out there that we actually know the answer to that question of how he'd want us to respond to it,
Yeah.
and locking down freedom of speech, locking down just especially, using the state, let alone more just reciprocal political violence from right to left. These are all the absolute last things that he would have wanted to happen. And so, you know, if you're talking like that and going down that road and trying to convince other people to come with you, you're not really fighting for the memory of Charlie Kirk or anything like that. You're just fighting. And I would encourage everybody not to do that, especially right now, because it's times like this where a lot of this stuff, a lot of things that don't make sense normally, things like this happen, really intense stuff's going on, and suddenly they seem to make a little more sense than they used to. But then that's going to fade, and those things aren't going to make as much sense anymore. And you don't want to be one of the people who look back. I've been there. I mean, we've all been there probably at some point. Look back on things you said or things you did after one of these crisis moments and have to just sort of, own the fact that as the society was ramping itself up into a conflict model, that your contribution to it was to help just a little bit intensify it rather than to de-escalate and try to make things better. And that's none of us should be doing, especially if you're on the right and interested in like putting over the policy goals and cultural and social goals of the right. You need to understand what Scott said earlier, that these type of things happening. This is not a show of strength by the left. This is like desperation from the left. This is like flailing because the right. I mean, it's like you said, the left is in the position of the Republicans in 2009 now, after George W. Bush, where nobody takes them seriously. They, and all the right has to do is keep their cool and keep marching forward. And that's how you can honor the memory of Charlie Kirk, and just get through this in a way that preserves your own dignity and lets you really look at yourself in the mirror when it's all done. So
Yeah. And look, and people shouldn't lose sight of the beauty of capitalism too, man. The whole thing is that as long as we're all trading with each other, then it doesn't matter what we look like and it doesn't matter what we believe in, right? We all use the same funny money and we all more or less speak English. And so we can we do. Everybody gets up in the morning and they go out and they engage in commerce all day long with people that they don't know, with people who are from different places, who believe different things than them, who look different from them, who they might not even like at all. But this is where we get the best price for the thing that we need for the project we're doing. And that's how the world works. So that's why there's no war ever coming between Austin and Round Rock. You know what I mean? And yes, it's true. The Democrats live there and the Republicans live here. I'm in Round Rock now. I'm from Travis County, but I've been gentrified. But the point is that that we got too much at stake. We're too interdependent with each other. And so you don't have to like each other. We don't have to all like hermitize and separate and disavow each other's culture. We are all Americans. We don't have to agree on everything at all. But we're not going anywhere. You know what I mean? It's not like the right's going to be able to get rid of the left. So then, I mean, and right now, the Democrats especially, and really the left generally speaking, but especially the Democratic Party is in such a position of weakness. All of their leaders are so old and decrepit and degenerate and discredited, and they're just pathetic. And I saw where, I forgot which poll it was, but the Republicans' numbers went down a little bit, and then so did the Democrats. The Democrats did not go up, on the other side of the seesaw. They're just falling too. People are just so sick of them. And then after this, I mean, just this alone is going to cost them however many points on the margin right there. And so Yeah, now is not the time to be totalitarians. Now's the time to conserve the revolution of 76. That's what conservatism is supposed to be about. That's what liberalism is supposed to be about, too, quite frankly. But y'all are all a bunch of terrible deviationists from true Americanism, which is the Declaration of Independence, natural rights, and free markets and property and capitalism. Um, so, um, so that's that. And now we're so out of time and overtime, but it is September 11th. And so it seems like somebody might say something about that. Probably you would say something wise about it. And then also, we got to talk about this, that we have these drones, these Russian drones shot down over Poland. Let me just report to you. The Russians say, oh, come on, they jammed our drones and drove them off course. Well, Poland invoked Article 4, which is not Article 5, but it says, oh, we need an emergency consultation about what the Allies are going to do about this. So they found every reason to want to exploit the crisis and ramp things up and say, see, I told you so, and this kind of thing about the war and make it worse rather than finding an opportunity to ramp things down. I guess I would just say we should leave NATO immediately, but everybody already knows that. But you see what an absolutely filthy moral hazard is built into this thing. We got the Poles who they got to know there's at least a good chance the Ukrainians jammed the Russian drones and drove them off course. We don't know what the percentage likelihood is. Maybe they know it for a fact or what, but there's no reason why the Russians are going to fly a bunch of unarmed drones over Poland just to get them shot down and create a crisis like this. So their
Well, they've
story, that's not their fault,
scrupulously
makes no
avoided
sense to me.
doing things like that this entire war, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
or
that's
even
just,
when there's an
I mean,
accident, right? Yeah, they accidentally shot a missile. A defensive missile went off course and hit a farmhouse in Poland, and they invoked Article 5 and all this stuff. Zelensky lied about it, said it was a Russian missile. We know it was. So,
yeah.
yes, God dang it. And then, I'm sorry, but then September 11th, say something smart, man. It's been a long time, and God dang, the world has suffered a hell of a lot in response to that thing.
Yeah, I mean, September 11th was kind of the way I judge generations isn't like, you're Gen X if you were born between this and that. It's how do you like what stage of your life were you in when some pivotal civilization defining event happened or when something changed? If you were a kid who was watching your parents deal with that scenario, you're a different generation than, somebody who was a young adult who was dealing with it, right? And so those of us who were uh, young adults. I guess I was 20 when 9/11 happened, already in the military, and so that's the culture I was in and the stage of life I was in. And for my DoD job, I would often go out to U.S. military bases for work, and it got to the point in 2019, 2020, right before I stopped working for the DoD, that I would go out there and I'd meet some of these young soldiers, sailors, airmen who were 18, 17, 18 years old. You can get into the military at 17 still with your parents' permission, 17, 18 years old. And I would start talking to them. In fact, it was 2020 because the election was coming up. And people would be talking about it. And I realized like there's going to be people voting in this election who were not alive when 9/11 happened, who were 7 years old when the financial crisis hit, I mean, shoot, there are people now who are of voting age who were like 10 years old when Trump announced his candidacy. And that stuff it's hard to wrap your head around sometimes and just, and realize that. But I think it's important to realize it because, it helps make you a little more tolerant to the way people sort of relate to a lot of these events. Somebody who was 4 years old when 9/11 happened is never going to relate to it the way you were if you were a young adult watching this happen on TV. And and those type of experiences and all of the things that happen afterwards. I know you've banged your head against this wall so many times, like, trying to get through to people in the lead up to the Ukraine war and the lead up to this Iran war, everything. A lot of these people, they weren't around for Iraq. They weren't there in 2002, or they were too young to remember it, And so trying to explain to some, to some of the younger people that none of this stuff is new. We've seen this playbook a million times. and preserving the memory of that and realizing that really the people who do these things are not that creative. They just run the same play over and over because they have new batches of people to put over, to put it over on. 9/11 was, it was this, you hate to say it, but like, the grant in when the history books are finally written, um, they may record that Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda won the war that they declared on the United States, you know, because our reaction to that event, in a weird way, it's contributed even to the things we're talking about in this episode. It's impoverished people. It's made people just completely distrust and all of the institutions that they need to be able to have some amount of faith in if we're going to hold ourselves together as a cohesive society. It's destroyed the economy. It is just sharpened and sort of militarized our politics to a degree that, again, if you're 20 years old now, that's the only politics you've ever known is just cutthroat. You're a Nazi, you're a communist, you're a terrorist, F you politics. That's all you know. And so even, even this stuff that we're seeing today is, in a way, it's still fallout from that. And you wonder if that blow was fatal. And I hope it wasn't, but it's gonna take real effort and sacrifice to put things back on course. And we're gonna have. I mean, you said the key thing, right? Which, unless you're, unless you're the Israelis dealing with the Palestinians, it is impossible to indulge the fantasy that your opponents are not going to be around tomorrow. They can indulge that fantasy if they want. Here in America, the people that you hate, they're still going to be here tomorrow, and they're going to be here the next day, and you've got to live with these people. And politically, I mean, I think the answer to that, you went right to it. It's subsidiarity. It's like, let everything that can be handled at the lowest possible level be handled at that level. A presidential election or a Supreme Court nomination is not as big of a deal if Alabama can have their abortion laws and New York can have theirs, and everybody just sort of accepts that that's how it is. Then that by itself turns the temperature down on our politics tremendously, just because the stakes are so much lower,
Right.
and because if you don't like the policies that you're living under, it's a matter of moving to the next town or county or maybe state, and not trying to find a new country to go live in. And I think that the events like of this week, for a lot of people, including a lot of people who don't pay a whole lot of attention to politics, but are sort of vaguely aware of who Charlie Kirk was and everything, it's sort of torn open and spilled out onto the table. The damage that we've allowed to accumulate in our society and our political system over the last 25 years, and there's a lot to clean up. And we need to get started on that now if we're going to have any chance of it. And so, again, like, I think to honor the memory of Charlie Kirk, whether you like this, not look, after what's happened, after where he's at now, whatever disagreements anybody had with him are totally irrelevant. Okay, he's gone. That's it. His kids and his wife are who survive him, and all the disagreements you had are completely irrelevant. The fact is, he was a good person. He's a good father, and he was a good husband, and he was a kind. I only met him one time, talked to him only for a few minutes, and he's one of those guys who I was nobody at the time. This was before I kind of blew up. It was at a conference. He treated me like I was the only person in the room. Everybody there wanting his attention, but he was talking to me at the time, and he was locked in, treating me like I was the only person in the room. He was just a kind person, a generous person, and that's all that matters at this point when you think of his memory. And so that's the aspect of his life that we all have to try to honor. And if we do that, we'll at least be taking a tentative step in the right direction. So,
yeah. All right. That's a great place to leave it. Thanks, Daryl. And thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.